In colonial India, the Parsi community mastered the British court system and weaponized it to serve their own internal interests. Standard historical narratives often describe imperial law as a tool for erasing indigenous identity, replacing it with categories defined by the colonizer. Parsi legal elites used these same courts to do the opposite, aggressively solidifying their communal boundaries to keep the outside world at bay. This is judicial ethnography, a process where indigenous elites use foreign courts to legally codify their own culture and identity. By defining themselves through the British courts, the community's legal path diverged. They separated their universal religion from a highly exclusive, racialized Parsi identity. Through high-stakes litigation, Parsi professionals replaced fluid traditions with a rigid model of race, rooted in eugenics. This engineered boundary was strictly patrilineal, preserving the rights of men while systematically excluding women who married outside the community. This legal architecture took decades to build, forged in a series of intra-group lawsuits between 1887 and 1925, culminating in the case of Saklat versus Bella. This framework outlasted the British Empire, creating a patriarchal legal precedent that continues to divide the Parsi community today. The conflict centered on physical space, specifically the fire temples and the towers of silence, which were strictly demarked as sacred and restricted. Traditionally, Zoroastrian priests were the sole authority in these spaces, deciding who was spiritually fit to enter and participate in the faith. Under colonial rule, that power shifted. To protect their assets, Parsi elites reconfigured these religious institutions into secular charitable property trusts. Because the temple was now a trust, the secular colonial judge became the final arbiter of who was legally qualified as a beneficiary. Religious belonging ceased to be a theological question. It was now a dispute over property law. This new trust structure faced its first major test at the Bombay High Court. In 1908, Justice Dinshaw Davar, the court's first Parsi judge, presided over Petit versus Jijiboy. The case involved a Frenchwoman who had converted to the faith but was barred from entering the temple. Justice Davar's ruling was definitive. He declared that Zoroastrian is a religion anyone can join, but Parsi is an exclusive race. He created a legal filter for the temple trusts, established only for the Parsi race, defined strictly as descendants of Persian immigrants and the children of Parsi fathers. This definition excluded religious converts and the children of Parsi mothers who married non-Parsis. A Parsi judge had successfully used colonial property law to insert a rigid patriarchal definition of race into the foundation of his own community's sacred spaces. 6 years later, the conflict moved to colonial Rangoon. A Parsi family adopted an Indian orphan named Bella, initiated her into the faith, and brought her to the local fire temple. The Orthodox community responded with a lawsuit, claiming Bella's presence desecrated the trust property because she was an ethnic outsider. This ledger shows the Bombay Commission, a massive effort where Parsi lawyers gathered ethnographic testimonial across the empire to determine if identity was a matter of race or religion. The Orthodox faction used European race science to argue that admitting outsiders would dilute their Persian purity. In 1925, the case reached the Privy Council in London. The highest court in the British Empire upheld the exclusion of ethnic outsiders from trust properties. The Privy Council relied entirely on Justice Davar's 1908 Bombay ruling. This process, centripetal jurisprudence, meant that local Parsi legal logic now governed the entire empire. Through intra-group litigation, a local patriarchal prejudice was transformed into an imperial edict, officially locking Parsi identity into a racial definition. These colonial precedents continue to dictate the modern legal battles faced by Parsi women who marry outside the community. Based on these century-old trust rulings, Parsi women in exogamous marriages are legally stripped of their rights to access trust properties, often losing the right to attend the final funeral rites for their own parents. Parsi men face no such penalty. They can marry non-Parsis without losing their access or their children's access to these same trusts. The current Gulrukh Gupta case at the Supreme Court of India is a direct challenge to this legacy of inequality. Secular Indian courts are still grappling with the eugenics-adjacent trust frameworks built by Parsi lawyers over 100 years ago. Parsi elites successfully localized colonial law, but the judicial ethnography they engineered ultimately trapped their own descendants inside a patriarchal cage of their own making.